I froze in the doorway of the restroom, unable to believe my own eyes. My son William was kneeling in front of a toilet with a rag in his hands, and towering over him stood Richard Sterling, his father-in-law, the owner of this damn company. Richard was laughing loudly, his voice echoing off the tiled walls. "Here he is, your genius with a summa cum laude diploma," Richard shouted to someone behind him. 30 years old, a higher education, and this is all he's good for. "Look, Vanessa, your husband finally found his true calling." I saw Vanessa Sterling, Will's wife, appear in the doorway. She didn't rush to defend him. She smiled. She just stood there smiling, watching her own father humiliate the man she had vowed to stay with in sickness and in health. Will lifted his head and saw me. There was so much shame in his eyes that I wished I could sink through the floor. And then he started crying. My grown, strong son cried like a little boy. "Mom," was all he managed to say. I turned around and walked out. Not because I didn't care, but because if I had stayed even one more second, I don't know what I might have done to Richard Sterling. But I knew one thing for sure. This man would pay. For every tear my son shed. For every second of humiliation. He would pay so dearly he would regret the day he decided to break my will. My name is Margaret Sullivan, and this is the story of how I destroyed the life of a man who dared to touch what mattered most to me. And trust me, by the end of this story you'll know exactly what price I made him pay. A price that turned a wealthy, influential businessman into no one. But before we continue, write which city you're from. It's important for us to know how far our stories reach. But first things first. To understand why I took such drastic measures, we need to go back many years. I was 28 then. I had just given birth to Will, and it felt like life had finally settled. I had a husband, a tiny baby, a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. Nothing luxurious, but it was ours. And I was happy. And then one morning I woke up and found a note on the kitchen table. Just a few lines written in shaky handwriting. "I'm sorry. I can't. Don't look for me." That was it. No explanations, no reasons. Just a note and an empty apartment. The man I trusted, the father of my child, simply disappeared. He left me alone with a 3-month-old baby in my arms. For the first few days I was in shock. I couldn't understand how something like this was even possible. But then it hit me, there was no one left to rely on. Only myself. And I had a son who needed to be fed, clothed, and raised. I took on 3 jobs at once. In the morning I worked as a cashier in a grocery store. In the afternoon I was a cleaner in an office building. In the evening I scrubbed floors for extra money. Yes, that's right. I scrubbed other people's hallways so my son could have a hot dinner. I slept 4 hours a night. I couldn't remember the last time I bought anything for myself. Every dollar went toward Will. I remember getting him ready for first grade. I wanted him to have everything the other kids had. A new uniform, a new backpack, nice notebooks. I saved for 6 months, cutting back on essentials. But when he walked into school on September 1st, he looked just as good as the others. That was my little celebration. My personal day of victory. Will grew up a smart boy. He studied well, never brought home bad grades, always helped around the house. He saw how exhausted I was and tried not to cause any trouble. Sometimes I caught his eyes, so serious, so grown up for his age. And I understood, he knew everything. He knew we didn't have money for the toys his classmates had. He knew I came home drained. He knew we were alone in this world. But he never complained. On the contrary, he promised me, "Mom, I'll study hard. I'll get into college. I'll find a good job. And you'll never have to work like this again." And you know what? He kept that promise. Will finished school with honors, entered the university on a scholarship, and 5 years later received his diploma summa cum laude. I cried at his graduation from happiness, pride, and relief. All those years of struggle, sleepless nights, exhausting work. It all paid off. My son had become an educated man. He achieved what I never could. And I believed he would finally have a different life. A life worthy of him. After graduating from college, Will found a job right away. The logistics company Swift Logistics. Not the most prestigious, but a good start to a career. The salary was modest, $45,000 a year, but Will was happy. He called me the same evening he signed the offer letter. "Mom, I got the job. Officially with benefits and everything, he said proudly. I start tomorrow. I listened, feeling warmth spread through me. My son. A college graduate. With a job. With a future. Congratulations, sweetheart. I'm so happy for you. Mom, I'm going to help you now. I'll send you money every month. You'll finally be able to rest. Well, you don't have to. I do, he said firmly. You spent your whole life working for me. Now it's my turn. And he really did help. He sent $500 a month, even though I knew it wasn't easy for him. He rented a small apartment near work to save on commuting. Lived modestly. But he always sent me money. Because of that, I was able to quit one of my jobs. I kept only the grocery store and the office cleaning. 2 shifts instead of 3. For the first time in 30 years, I had free evenings. I could come home at 8 instead of 10. I could watch TV, lie on the couch, simply exist as a human being and not as a workhorse. Will visited me once a week. We had dinner together and he told me about his job, his colleagues, how he was learning to manage routes and logistics. He talked about his plans. Building a career, becoming a manager one day, then a department head. I don't want to stay in a low position my whole life, Mom, he said. I want something more. I stroked his head the way I used to when he was a child. You'll succeed, Will. You're smart, you're capable. Just don't rush. Everything in its time. 6 months passed. Will settled into his job and received a small raise. Life was finally becoming steady. I thought the worst was behind us. That everything would only get better. That my son would be able to build his life, his career, his future in peace. How wrong I was. One evening in October, Will called me. I immediately heard something different in his voice. Excitement, a certain kind of joy. Mom, are you sitting down? I am. What happened? I met a girl. My heart stopped for a moment. Of course, I had always dreamed that Will would one day have a family. But for some reason that moment filled me with anxiety. An inexplicable, deep anxiety. Really? I tried to sound cheerful. Tell me about her. Her name is Vanessa. We met at a business meeting. She came to our office for work. She's incredible. Beautiful, smart, educated. I never thought someone like her would even notice me. That sentence alarmed me. Never thought she'd notice me. But my son was a wonderful person. Intelligent, kind, decent. Any girl should have been happy to be with him. Well, you're an amazing man. And if she recognized that, then she's a smart girl. I want you to meet her, he continued. Can we all meet together? This Saturday at a cafe? Of course, sweetheart. I'd be happy to meet her. When I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. For some reason, I didn't feel the joy a mother usually feels when hearing about her son's new girlfriend. I felt something else. A premonition. A bad one. But I brushed those thoughts aside. I told myself I was just afraid Will would leave my life, start his own family, and I'd be alone. Ordinary motherly jealousy, nothing more. Saturday came quickly. And with it, the meeting that changed everything. I arrived early, nervous as if before an exam. I fixed my hair and looked at my reflection in the mirror. My only decent blouse had been washed and ironed. I wanted to look presentable so my future daughter-in-law wouldn't think Will came from a troubled family. They walked in together. Will was glowing with happiness, holding her hand. And Vanessa, she was beautiful. Stunningly beautiful. Long dark hair, perfect makeup, an expensive dress, a delicate designer handbag. She looked like a model from a magazine. And immediately I felt the difference between us. Will introduced us. Mom, this is Vanessa Sterling. Vanessa, this is my mom, Margaret Sullivan. Vanessa extended her hand, and I noticed her perfectly manicured nails. My hands, rough from work and with short broken nails, looked like an old woman's next to hers. I felt embarrassed, but I smiled and shook her hand. It's very nice to meet you, Vanessa said. Her voice was polite but cold. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. She looked me over, from head to toe. And in that look I saw something I didn't like. Contempt. Slight, barely noticeable, but I felt it. We sat down. Will ordered coffee and desserts, talking about how they met at a business meeting and how he immediately liked her. Vanessa remained mostly silent, nodding occasionally but barely participating in the conversation. I tried to start small talk. Asked about her job, her interests. I work in marketing, she answered curtly. At my father's company. We do industrial manufacturing. How interesting, I said. And what exactly does your father's company do? Vanessa shrugged as if my question was too simple to bother with. Sterling Industries. We produce components for the construction industry. We're one of the largest companies in the region. She said it with such pride, such superiority that I felt uneasy. I saw how she looked at our modest cafe, at my simple clothes, at Will, who was trying so hard to impress her. And I understood. This girl was used to luxury. She grew up in wealth and comfort. And Will and I, we were people from a completely different world. After the meeting, Will walked me to the bus stop. He asked if I liked Vanessa. I wanted to be honest. I wanted to tell him something felt wrong. But he looked at me with such hope, such happiness in his eyes that I couldn't. I just hugged him and said, "The most important thing is that she loves you, sweetheart. Nothing else matters." But the doubts remained. And they only grew stronger with every new encounter. 3 months later, Will proposed to Vanessa. She accepted and the wedding preparations began. Will was over the moon, telling me on the phone about their plans and future life together. I listened silently and tried to be happy for him. But inside, the anxiety kept growing. They decided to have the wedding at Vanessa's parents' home. Will suggested a more modest option, a restaurant, a small banquet hall. But Vanessa insisted, "We'll celebrate at my parents' place. They have a mansion outside the city, we'll organize everything there." Will agreed. He always agreed with her. The wedding day arrived. I put on my best dress, the one I bought specially for the occasion. I had spent 2 months of my salary on it, but I wanted to look presentable. I wanted Will not to be ashamed of his mother. The Sterling home turned out to be a real mansion. A huge property, a tall fence, security at the gate. I walked inside and froze. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, wide staircases, paintings on the walls. People who lived here had never known what it meant to count every penny or to work 3 jobs just to feed a family. Guests gathered in a large hall. Everyone was well-dressed, confident. I felt out of place. I stood by the wall, unsure whom to talk to, afraid of saying something wrong. Then a man approached me. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in an expensive suit. He looked down at me with the same contempt I had seen in Vanessa's eyes. "You must be the groom's mother," he said. Not a question, a statement. As if I were beneath him. "Yes," I replied. "Margaret Sullivan." He did not extend his hand. He simply nodded. "Richard Sterling, father of the bride. I hope your son understands the honor he's being given by being welcomed into our family." Something tightened inside me. Honor. My son was an educated, hard-working, decent man. He was not inferior to anyone here. But I kept quiet. It was Will's wedding day and I didn't want to ruin it for him. "My son is worthy of your daughter," I said softly. Richard smirked. "See, Vanessa is used to a certain standard of living. I hope your Will can provide it." Although judging by where he works, he left the sentence hanging. This man was insulting my son without even knowing him. Judging him by his salary, his position, his lack of wealth. And I wanted to strike him. But I held back. I turned away and walked off before I said something I would regret. The wedding was extravagant and expensive. Will and Vanessa looked happy. But all evening I couldn't shake the heavy feeling inside. I saw Richard Sterling talking with his guests, laughing, drinking expensive wine, discussing business. I saw the way they looked at Will, like an outsider who had wandered into their circle by accident. And then I overheard a conversation. Richard stood with some man on the terrace. They were smoking. I walked past them and unintentionally caught their words. "Well, Richard married off your daughter?" the man asked. "Yes," Sterling replied. "Vanessa fell in love. What can you do? The groom isn't exactly our level. Works in some small company for peanuts. But it's fine, we'll teach him. Maybe he'll turn out useful if we handle him right." They laughed. And I realized, for Richard Sterling, my son was a project. Someone to be trained, fixed, shaped into something convenient. And for the first time in years I felt real fear. Fear for Will. The wedding passed, the honeymoon ended, and ordinary family life began. Will continued working at Swift Logistics, and Vanessa worked at her father's company. The newlyweds rented a 2-bedroom apartment in a good neighborhood. Will told me he paid $2,500 a month, which was a heavy strain on their budget. For the first few months I barely saw my son. He was busy with work, the household, and his wife. He called rarely and spoke briefly. "Mom, everything's fine, don't worry." But I still worried. A mother's heart always knows when something is wrong. One day I couldn't take it anymore and decided to visit them. I bought a cake and some fruit, wanted to surprise the young couple. I rang the doorbell. Will opened and I gasped. In 2 months he had changed. He had lost weight, had dark circles under his eyes, and there was a certain exhaustion in his expression. "Will, sweetheart, are you sick?" I touched his forehead. "No, Mom, just a lot of work," he said with a weak smile. "Come in, Vanessa will be happy to see you." But Vanessa didn't look happy. She sat on the couch with her phone in hand and didn't even get up to greet me. "Hello, Mrs. Sullivan," she said without looking up from the screen. "Hello, Vanessa. I brought a cake. Thought we could have tea together." "Thank you, but I'm on a diet." "We'll put it in the fridge." Will silently took the cake to the kitchen. I sat down and looked around the apartment. Everything was expensive and stylish, yet somehow cold. As if people didn't live here, they only existed. "How are you settling in?" I asked, trying to start a conversation. "The apartment is nice and the neighborhood seems convenient." "It's fine." Vanessa finally set the phone aside. "Although we'd prefer something bigger. But with Will's salary we can't afford more." There was something unpleasant in her tone. A hint of reproach. Dissatisfaction. "Will earns well for his age," I said, defending my son. "He has his whole future ahead of him." "He's 30, Mrs. Sullivan. That's not an age for, the future is ahead. My classmates are already department heads. Some have their own businesses. And he's still hauling freight." Will came out of the kitchen. I saw his cheek twitch. He had heard it. "Vanessa, we agreed, not in front of my mom," he said quietly. "What?" "I'm just being honest." He shrugged. "My father offered you a job at his company. But you insist on that pride of yours." "I want to earn my place myself." Will sat next to me, his hands trembling. "I don't want to live off someone." "Living off someone?" Vanessa jumped up from the couch. "It's called using opportunities. Everyone does it. But no, you're too proud. We'll spend our whole lives in a rented apartment, saving on everything because you have your principles." I watched the scene unfold and felt everything inside me tighten. That was why Will looked so worn out. This woman was pressuring him. Day after day, week after week. Throwing at him that he didn't earn enough, wasn't successful enough, wasn't good enough for her. "Vanessa," I tried to intervene. "Will works honestly. He's building his career on his own. That deserves respect." She looked at me as if I were an insect. "Mrs. Sullivan, with all due respect, you spent your whole life working for pennies. You don't understand how big business works. Connections are everything. And if there's a chance to enter a major company through family, you use it." "Vanessa." Will raised his voice. "Don't you dare talk to my mother like that. I'm saying what I think." She folded her arms across her chest. "And if you want us to have a normal life, future children, a car, our own place, you'll have to swallow your pride and accept my dad's offer." I stood up. "It's time for me to go." "Mom, wait." Will try to stop me. "No, sweetheart. You two have things to sort out. I don't want to get in the way." I left. And on the bus home I cried. This marriage was a mistake. I saw it clearly now. Vanessa didn't love Will. She loved the idea of a successful husband, money, status. My son was nothing but a tool for achieving that. After that visit, Will started calling me more often. Usually late in the evening when Vanessa wasn't home. He complained he couldn't handle the constant pressure. "Mom, I don't know what to do. Every day it's the same." He says I'm a failure. That all her friends married successful men and she ended up with a poor logistics worker. "I'm trying, I'm working hard, but it's never enough." "Will, do you love her?" I asked directly. He was silent for a long time. "I don't know, Mom. I loved the girl I met 6 months ago. But now I don't even recognize her. He's changed. Or maybe I just didn't see the real her before. Then maybe you should think about. No, he cut me off. I made a vow. We're husband and wife. I have to try to save this family. Maybe if I agree to work for her father, things will get better. Maybe she's right and I'm just too stubborn. Well, don't do this for her. Do only what you believe is right. I don't even know what's right anymore. His voice trembled. I'm 30, Mom. I'm supposed to provide for my family. And if swallowing my pride is what it takes, maybe that's what I should do. We said goodbye. I went to bed but couldn't fall asleep. I tossed and turned all night thinking about what was happening to my son. Vanessa was breaking him. Slowly but surely. Turning him into a man who doubted himself. His abilities, his worth. And I understood. If he went to work for Richard Sterling, things would only get worse. That man would never give Will a proper job. He had something planned. Something bad. But I could do nothing. Only wait and hope my son would make the right choice. 2 weeks later, Will called again. Mom, I've decided. I'll talk to Mr. Sterling. I'll ask him to take me into the company. If that's the only way to keep peace in the family, I agree. My heart went cold. Will, think again. I already have. I'm going to his office tomorrow. Vanessa is thrilled. She says I've finally grown up. I heard such exhaustion, such resignation in his voice, that I wanted to scream. But I stayed silent. My son was an adult. This was his decision. And I had to respect it even though I was terrified for him. Will scheduled a meeting with Richard Sterling for the next day. He prepared for it as if it were an exam, rereading information about the company, planning what to say, how to present himself. Vanessa was over the moon, even cooked him dinner that evening, something she hadn't done in 2 months. See? It's so simple, she said, putting pasta on his plate. One conversation with Dad and our life will change. You'll enter a major company, start building a career, and we'll be able to rent a bigger apartment. Will nodded, but I knew deep down he was unsure. He called me late that night. Mom, I'm scared. Of what, sweetheart? That I won't manage. That I'll disappoint everyone. That Mr. Sterling will look at me and say, you're not good enough. I've never worked in large companies. I don't have any manufacturing experience. Well, you're smart and educated. You graduated summa cum laude. You learn quickly. You'll be fine. I hope so, he sighed. This is my last chance. If it doesn't work out, Vanessa, I don't know what will happen. The meeting took place at the Sterling Industries office. Will came in his best suit, carrying a folder of documents, his resume, diploma, and recommendations. The receptionist led him into Richard Sterling's office. Richard sat behind a massive darkwood desk in a leather chair, like a king on a throne. He looked up at Will and smirked. So, son-in-law finally ready? He asked instead of greeting him. Good morning, Mr. Sterling, Will said, extending his hand. Richard shook it weakly, almost reluctantly. Sit down. Vanessa said you want to work in our company. Yes. I'm ready to apply my knowledge and skills, ready to learn and grow. Stop. Richard waved his hand. No need for rehearsed speeches. I'll hire you. Not because you're so talented, but because you're my daughter's husband. And I'm tired of hearing her complain about having a poor husband. Will clenched his fists under the table but stayed silent. What position do you have available? He asked. Assistant logistics manager, Richard replied. The salary is $90,000 a year. Officially. Plus bonuses if you perform well. You start Monday. $90,000. That was $45,000 more than he earned at Swift Logistics. Will brightened. Maybe things weren't so bad? Maybe Richard really was giving him a chance? Thank you, Mr. Sterling. I won't let you down. We'll see. Richard leaned back in his chair. I have high standards. I don't tolerate mistakes or laziness. You'll work exactly the way I tell you. Understood. Understood. Then you're free to go. Monday at 9 a.m. Bring your documents. Will walked out of the office feeling uplifted. He immediately called Vanessa. It worked. He hired me. $90,000, officially. Vanessa screamed with joy. I told you. I knew Dad would help you. Will, this is the beginning of a new life. That evening he came to see me. I hadn't seen him that happy in a long time. His eyes shined and he was smiling. Mom, everything will be fine. I can feel it. Mr. Sterling gave me a chance and I'm going to prove I deserve it. I'll work so hard he'll regret not hiring me sooner. I looked at him and tried to be happy. But deep inside something warned me. This was a trap. Richard Sterling wasn't the kind of man who helped people. He was planning something. Something bad. Well, what exactly will you be doing? What are your responsibilities? Assistant Logistics Manager. I'll help organize shipments, handle paperwork, oversee quality control. Basically what I did before, just in a larger company. And he didn't say anything strange? No, Mom. Everything was normal. Just a typical interview. He's just that type of person. A bit harsh, very direct. But that's normal for a businessman at his level. I didn't argue. Maybe I really was overthinking. Maybe Richard wanted to give his son-in-law a chance for his daughter's sake. Maybe everything would truly be fine. The weekend passed quickly. Will prepared for his first day, reread information about the company, studied the structure, memorized the names of key employees. Vanessa was gentle with him for the first time in months. Everything seemed good. On Sunday evening, Will called me one last time before starting his new job. Mom, tomorrow is a big day. I'm nervous, but in a good way. You know, like before a race. Like my whole life has been leading to this moment. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. You're doing great. You'll handle everything. Thank you, Mom. I love you. I love you too, Will. We said goodbye. And I sat alone in my quiet apartment and prayed. Prayed that everything would be okay. That my son wouldn't get hurt. That my fears were wrong. But Monday morning everything collapsed. At 10 o'clock Will called me. He was crying. My 30-year-old son was crying so hard he couldn't speak. Will, what happened? Where are you? Mom, come please. I'm at the office. I'm so ashamed. I'm coming. Hold on. I dropped everything and ran. All the way to the Sterling Industries building. My heart pounded like crazy. What had happened? What had that bastard Richard done to my son? I rushed into the building, ran upstairs. The receptionist tried to stop me, but I pushed past her. I searched for Will, calling his name. Then I heard laughter. Loud, disgusting laughter. Richard Sterling's laughter. I followed the sound, pushed open the door marked restroom, and froze. What I saw will stay with me forever. My son, my smart, educated, decent son, was kneeling in front of a toilet with a rag in his hands. His sleeves rolled up, dirt stains on his face. His brand new suit, the one he proudly put on that morning, was covered in soap streaks. And towering over him stood Richard Sterling, arms crossed, laughing. Loudly, nastily, with pleasure. Come on, work harder. Richard Sterling shouted. Right here, you missed a spot. See that stain? Or do you have vision problems? Behind Richard stood two men in expensive suits, clearly his business partners. They were smirking, exchanging glances, watching the spectacle. Richard, are you seriously giving him a job like this? Asked one of them, a gray-haired man in his 60s. Why not? Richard turned to him. I always say you have to start from the bottom. Let him get to know the company from the inside. Literally from the inside. Bathrooms are the foundation of any business. They burst out laughing. Will kept scrubbing the toilet, his shoulders shaking. He was crying. My adult, strong son was crying on his knees in a filthy restroom in front of those men. Mr. Sterling, you promised. I thought I'd be an assistant manager. Will's voice was barely audible. And you are an assistant. Richard leaned toward him. An assistant to the janitor. Or did you think I'd give you a good position just like that? Who do you think you are? Nobody. A logistics worker from some third-rate company. You have no connections, no money, nothing. The only thing you have is my daughter, who foolishly married you. Dad's right, Will. I heard that voice and felt something inside me break. Vanessa Sterling appeared in the doorway. She was leaning against the frame, smiling. Just standing there and smiling while her husband was being humiliated. Vanessa. Will lifted his tear-filled eyes to her, full of hope. Tell them, please. This isn't right. Not right. She stepped closer. And what is right? Living on a pathetic salary your whole life. Well, Dad is teaching you. If you want to work in a serious company, you have to start from the very bottom. Understand every detail. Even the bathrooms. But he promised me a manager position. 90,000 salary. Richard roared with laughter. Promised? Boy, do you have a contract? Did you sign any papers? Well, then stop talking nonsense. I offered you a job in my company. Which job? That's my decision. And so far all I see is that you're only suited for this. He kicked the bucket, splashing water across the floor, soaking Will's pants. Oh, sorry, son-in-law. Looks like you'll have to mop the floor too. His partners laughed again. And Vanessa just shrugged as if this was completely normal. And then Will saw me. Our eyes met. And in his gaze I saw so much pain, so much shame, so much despair that I wished I could die right there just to stop witnessing it. Mom, he whispered, and new tears rolled down his cheeks. I stepped forward. I wanted to run to him, lift him off the floor, hug him, protect him. But my legs wouldn't move. I stood frozen, unable to take a single step. Oh. Richard turned to me. Look who's here, the mother-in-law. Mrs. Sullivan, perfect timing. Look how hardworking your son is. First day on the job and already doing great. His partners went silent, sensing the shift in the room. Even they understood things had gone too far. Richard, maybe that's enough, the gray-haired man said. We have a meeting. Yes, yes, of course. Richard clapped his hands. We'll finish this up. And I expect everything to shine within an hour. You know we have a 3-month probation period. If you can't handle it, you're out. And Vanessa will be left without a breadwinner. They walked out of the restroom. Richard, his partners, Vanessa. They passed by me as if I didn't exist. Vanessa didn't even look in my direction. That disgusting smile was still on her face. Will and I were left alone. He sat on the floor in a puddle of dirty water, a rag in his hands, crying uncontrollably. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You shouldn't have seen this. I came to him, knelt beside him, hugged him, held him the way I used to when he was little and hurting. Will, get up. Get up right now. You're leaving this place. This instant. I can't, Mom. Vanessa, she said if I quit on the first day she'll leave me. I promised her. I gave my word. Listen to me. I took his face in my hands. These people are breaking you. On purpose. They are turning you into a slave. And this is only the beginning. Do you understand? Only the beginning. If you stay it will get worse. But, I'm a husband. I'm supposed to provide for my family. Not at this price, sweetheart. Not at this price. But I saw it in his eyes, he wouldn't leave. He would endure it. For Vanessa. For the marriage. To prove he wasn't weak, wasn't a failure, wasn't a useless husband. I walked out of the Sterling Industries building and stood outside for a long time, breathing the cold air, trying to calm myself. People passed by, cars drove past. Life continued as if nothing had happened. But inside me everything was burning. My son, my only son for whom I gave up my entire life, was on his knees in front of a toilet while his father-in-law and wife laughed at him. And I realized I couldn't just stand by. I couldn't wait until they completely destroyed him. I had to do something. I took out my phone. There was one name in my contacts. A person who had helped me many years ago when my husband left me alone with an infant. A person I trusted. I dialed the number. The phone rang 3 times before someone answered. Daniel Reynolds speaking. The voice held the same confidence and calm it had 30 years ago. Mr. Reynolds, this is Margaret Sullivan. Do you remember me? A second of silence. Mrs. Sullivan? Of course I remember. It's been so many years. How are you? How is Will? Not well, Mr. Reynolds. Very not well. I need your help. Come to my office. Today if you can. What time is good for you? I can come now. Is that okay? Of course. I'll be waiting. Daniel Reynolds was the attorney recommended to me when my husband abandoned us. I needed help with paperwork, alimony, the divorce. I had no money to hire an expensive lawyer, but Daniel helped me almost for free. He said he couldn't bear to see a woman with a baby left alone without support. 30 years had passed since then. We hadn't seen each other, but I never forgot his kindness. Never forgot that there were still decent people in this world. His office was downtown in a small business building. I went up to the 3rd floor and found the door with the sign Reynolds Law Office. I knocked. "Come in." I entered. Mr. Reynolds stood up from his desk. He had aged, of course, gray hair, wrinkles around his eyes. But he was still fit, still attentive. "Mrs. Sullivan." He walked around the desk and shook my hand. "Please sit." "Coffee?" "No, thank you. I need help." He sat across from me, folding his hands on the desk. "I'm listening." And I told him everything. About how Will married Vanessa. About the wedding at the Sterling mansion. About Richard and his arrogance. About how Vanessa pressured my son, pushed him into working for her father. And about this morning. The toilet, the rag, the laughter, the humiliation. Daniel listened silently. His face showed no emotion, but I saw his jaw tense when I described the scene in the restroom. "Mrs. Sullivan, does Will know you're here?" "No. And he mustn't know. Mr. Reynolds, I can't just sit and watch them break my son. I have to do something. And I want to hit this Richard Sterling so hard he regrets everything." "What exactly do you want?" "I want to destroy him," I said calmly, firmly. "He humiliated my son. Turned him into a joke. Forced him to kneel. And I want him to feel the same." Daniel leaned back, thinking. "I understand. But revenge is dangerous, Mrs. Sullivan. Are you prepared for the consequences?" "I am. I'm 60 years old. I've worked my whole life, saved every dollar, denied myself everything. I have some savings, an apartment. I'm willing to risk everything just to make that bastard pay." Daniel stood, walked to the window, looked outside. Richard Sterling, owner of Sterling Industries. Big company, well known in the region. This won't be easy. People like him are protected by money, connections, lawyers. But there must be a way. There has to be a weakness. He turned to me. "Everyone has a weakness. Give me a week. I'll gather information on the man and his company. Everything I can find, finances, partners, debts, scandals. And if I find something we can use, we'll act." "Agreed." "Agreed. How much do I owe you?" "For now, nothing. Let's see what I can find first. If I discover something useful, we'll discuss terms." I stood and reached out my hand. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. You have no idea how much this means to me." "I do." He shook my hand firmly. "I'm a father myself. I understand what it feels like to see someone hurt your child." I left his office feeling lighter. For the first time that terrible day, I felt hope. Something would be done. Justice would be served. The week dragged on painfully. Will called me every evening. He told me about his day, and every day his voice sounded more exhausted, more lifeless. "Mom, today they made me wash windows in the entire building. 32 windows. Mr. Sterling said it's part of training. That I have to understand how important cleanliness is in the company. Sweetheart, leave. Please leave that place." "I can't. Vanessa said if I quit, she'll file for divorce. Mom, I love her. I can't lose her." I listened in silence. Because I understood, he didn't love Vanessa. He was just afraid to admit he had made a mistake. Afraid that if he divorced her, everyone would say he was a failure. That he couldn't keep a family together. That he wasn't strong enough. 8 days later, Daniel called. "Mrs. Sullivan, come over. I found something." I arrived 30 minutes later. Daniel was sitting at his desk, a thick folder of documents in front of him. "Sit down," he nodded toward the chair. "What I'm about to tell you will surprise you. Go on." "Richard Sterling is on the verge of bankruptcy." Daniel opened the folder and pulled out several sheets. "His company is in critical financial condition. Debt to banks, $10 million. Overdue loans. Unpaid invoices to suppliers. A 30% drop in production over the past year." I stared at him. "But how he lives in a huge house, drives an expensive car." "A facade," Daniel shrugged. "Many businessmen live in debt. They show the world luxury while barely staying afloat. 3 years ago, Sterling made several major bad investments. Put money into a project that collapsed. Lost $7 million. He's been trying to recover ever since, but he's sinking deeper. So the company might go bankrupt? Not might, will within a year unless he finds an investor or pays off the debt. Banks are already threatening to seize his assets. Partners are breaking contracts. He's surviving on reputation alone. I looked at the documents and felt something shift inside me. Richard Sterling, arrogant, wealthy, self-important Richard, was actually broke. He humiliated my son while he himself was standing at the edge of the cliff. Mr. Reynolds, what if we buy his company? He looked at me carefully. Are you serious? Absolutely. How much would it cost? Daniel grabbed a calculator and started counting. To buy a controlling stake, you'd need to purchase the company's debts from the banks, negotiate with creditors, offer Sterling favorable terms. The total is $5 million. My breath caught. 5 to 7 million. I had $100,000 in savings. My apartment was worth another $400,000. Altogether, $500,000. Where could I get the rest? Mrs. Sullivan, Daniel leaned toward me. I understand your motivation. But this is unrealistic. You don't have that kind of money. What if I take out a loan? You're 60. No bank will give that kind of loan to a retiree. I lowered my head. He was right. It was madness. I couldn't buy a company for millions of dollars. Impossible. But then Daniel continued. There is another option. I looked up. What option? We create a shell company. A fictional structure that, on paper, looks like a major investor. You invest your $500,000 as the initial contribution. I find investors willing to participate in exchange for a share. We gather the needed amount, buy the company through an intermediary, and then reveal the truth. Sterling will find out his company is owned by Margaret Sullivan. I looked at him and knew this was the chance. The only chance. Is that legal? Absolutely. We're just using standard corporate acquisition procedures. Nothing illegal. Then let's do it. Daniel extended his hand. Agreed. We begin the operation. I shook his hand and felt it. The war had begun. And I would win it. While Daniel began setting up the shell company, Will's life became hell. Every evening he called me, and with every call I heard less hope in his voice. Mom, today Mr. Sterling made me unload trucks, he said. 8 hours straight. Crates weighing 100 pounds each. My back won't straighten. Will, you're an assistant logistics manager. That's not your job. He says I need to understand every step of the process from the inside. That a real manager knows every stage of production. Vanessa agrees. Vanessa. Every time he said her name, I clenched my fists. That woman never defended her husband. She supported her father in everything. On Will's 3rd week at work, I decided to visit him myself. I rang the doorbell at their apartment. Vanessa opened it, wearing a silk robe, holding a glass of wine. It was 7 in the evening. Mrs. Sullivan? What are you doing here? She didn't even invite me in, she just stood in the doorway. I want to see Will. Where is he? At work, where else? Dad gave him a task to inventory the warehouse. He'll be back late. At 8 in the evening? In the warehouse. Vanessa shrugged. Real men work late. Not like those losers who run home to their wives at 5. I stepped closer. Vanessa, tell me honestly. Don't you feel sorry for him? At all? He's your husband. She looked at me with cold eyes and took a sip of wine. Sorry? Mrs. Sullivan will chose this life himself. He wanted to work in a major company, well here he is. Dad is teaching him. Turning him into a real man, not a weakling. He's turning him into a slave. I couldn't hold back. He puts him on his knees, humiliates him in front of people. That's not training, that's abuse. Vanessa smirked. You just don't understand how business works. In serious companies, everyone goes through this. A test of strength. The weak break and leave. The strong survive and build a career. And if Will breaks? Then he's not my man, she said it calmly, as if talking about a defective item. I need a strong man, Mrs. Sullivan. Someone who can provide for me and our future children. Not a winner who runs to his mom after the first difficulties. I looked at her and understood. This woman didn't love my son. Never did. For her, he was a project, an investment. And if the project failed, she would simply find another. I'll go, I said quietly. Tell Will I came. I'll tell him. If I remember. She closed the door. And I stood in the hallway crying. My son lived in this hell, working late into the night, suffering humiliation and coming home to a wife who thought he was weak. The next day I met with Daniel in his office. He laid out documents in front of me. Mrs. Sullivan, I created a shell company, Summit Capital. Officially, it's registered to a proxy, an acquaintance of mine who agreed to help for a small fee. On paper, the company looks solid. An office, accounts, transaction history. And the money? How do we get $5 million? Daniel slid a calculator toward me. You have $100,000 in savings and an apartment worth $400,000. That's $500,000 total. I found 3 investors willing to join the project, each investing $1 million. That makes $3 million. Altogether we have $3.5 million. But we're short by $1,500,000. Correct. But we can take a loan under Summit Capital secured by future assets, meaning Sterling Industries itself. The bank will issue the loan if it sees we're buying a real business. And if the bank refuses? It won't. I have connections. I've already arranged everything with a manager at one of the banks. He'll approve the deal. I looked at the calculations and realized it was possible. Insane, risky, but possible. Mr. Reynolds, if we do this, I lose everything. My apartment, my savings, everything I worked 30 years for. Yes. And if the plan fails, you'll be left with nothing. But if it works, you'll become the owner of a company worth $10 million. And you'll be able to destroy Richard Sterling. I closed my eyes. I saw Will kneeling in that restroom. I saw Richard laughing. I saw Vanessa smiling. Let's do it. I opened my eyes and looked at Daniel. I'm ready to risk everything. Then sign the documents. We begin. The next 2 weeks were insane. I sold my apartment. Rented a small room in a rooming house on the outskirts of the city for $500 a month. Took all my savings from the bank. Signed the paperwork transferring the money to Summit Capital. Daniel met with investors, convinced them, showed them calculations. He explained that Sterling Industries had huge potential but was in crisis. That with proper restructuring it would become profitable. They agreed. The bank approved the loan, secured by future assets. $1,500,000 at 18% annual interest. Terrible terms, but we had no other options. While I dealt with all this, Will kept working for Richard. He called me less and less. His voice grew quieter. One day he said, "Mom, I'm tired. I'm just so tired. Will, quit that job. Please." "I can't." Vanessa said. She said that if I quit, I'm a complete nobody. That no other woman would ever want me. That I'm lucky she married me at all. She's lying. You're a wonderful man. No, Mom. I haven't achieved anything. I'm 30 and I'm cleaning bathrooms. Maybe she's right. Maybe I really am worthless. I listened to those words and felt something tear inside me. They were breaking him. Psychologically, emotionally. Turning him into someone who hated himself. A month after the operation began, Daniel called me. "Mrs. Sullivan, we have all the money. The $5 million are gathered. Now we have to approach Richard Sterling with the offer. How will we do that?" "Officially. Through attorneys. Summit Capital will send him an offer to purchase a controlling stake and buy out the company's debts. The kind of offer he can't refuse. And if he refuses? He won't. His company is hanging by a thread. The banks are about to start seizing his assets. We're offering him a way out. He'll take the money, pay off the debt, and walk away with something. Otherwise, he'll lose everything." "When do we send the offer?" "Tomorrow." I exhaled. Then tomorrow the final act begins. The offer from Summit Capital was delivered to Richard Sterling the next day. Daniel told me that the attorneys brought the documents in person, placed them on his desk, and said, "You have 3 days to decide." Richard, just as Daniel predicted, took the documents. He began studying them, consulting with his lawyers. For 3 days he thought, calculated, analyzed. And during that time something happened that I was not prepared for. Will called me. It was 9 in the evening. Mom, his voice was shaking. Can I come to your place? Of course, sweetheart. What happened? I quit my job. My heart sank. You quit? Well, how? What happened? I'll tell you when I get there. Just, can I stay with you tonight? I don't have anywhere else to go. Come right away. An hour later the doorbell rang. I opened the door and gasped. Will stood there with a backpack on his shoulders. His face was swollen, his eyes red, and there was a bruise on his cheek. Will, my God, what happened to you? He walked inside, sat on the couch, and covered his face with his hands. Mom, I couldn't take it anymore. I just couldn't. I sat next to him and held him. Tell me, what happened? He took a deep breath and began. Important clients came to see Richard today. Investors from New York. Big ones. They were considering putting money into the company. Richard wanted to impress them. To show what a successful enterprise he had. Will paused and swallowed. They went on a tour of the building. Richard showed them the workshops, the warehouses, the offices. And then they entered the restroom. And there was a clog. One of the toilets wasn't working. I already knew where this was going. Richard called me in front of those people. He said, well, we have a problem. Fix it right now. I told him we needed to call maintenance. And he laughed and said, you are our maintenance. Take the plunger and get it done. Will clenched his fists. Mom, there were 7 men standing there in expensive suits, watching me. And Richard handed me a plunger and said, come on, son-in-law, show your skills. Or can you only talk? And you? I refused. For the first time in 2 months I said, no. I said it wasn't my responsibility. That I wasn't a maintenance worker. That I had a degree and graduated summa cum laude. A faint smile flickered on Will's face. You know what he answered? He said, a degree? Your degree is worth as much as this toilet paper. You're nothing. Useless. And if it weren't for my daughter, you'd be dying in that pathetic job of yours making, what, $45,000 a year. Oh God. And then he turned to those investors and said, see? This is why I don't put relatives in serious positions. They think they're entitled to everything. But in reality, dead weight. Will stood up and began pacing around the room. They all laughed. All of them. Those New York businessmen stood there laughing at me. And I just turned around and walked out. Went to the office, wrote a resignation letter, left it on the receptionist's desk and walked out of the building. You did the right thing, Will. No, Mom. I did the wrong thing. He stopped and looked at me. When I went home and told Vanessa I quit, she screamed at me. She said I was a coward. That I embarrassed her in front of her father. That she couldn't be the wife of a loser who couldn't last even a month in a real company. Sweetheart. I said that it was too late. That I was filing for divorce. That I didn't want to see her again. That her friends were right when they said she'd made a mistake marrying me. Will's voice broke. And then she grabbed my bag, started stuffing my things into it and screamed, get out. Get out of here. I don't want to see you. I tried to stop her and she hit me. Right here. He pointed to the bruise on his cheek. I took my backpack and left. There was nothing else to take. Everything else was hers. The apartment was paid for with her money. The furniture was hers. Even the clothes on me she bought. Will sank onto the couch and cried. Not quietly, not restrained. He sobbed like a child betrayed by the people closest to him. I hugged him, held him tight, stroked his hair. Sweetheart, my dear boy. Everything will be okay. I promise you. Everything will be okay. How, Mom? He looked at me through tears. How can it be okay? I lost my job. I lost my wife. I lost my home. I have nothing. I'm 30 years old and living with my mother again. I'm a failure. A complete nobody. No. I took his face in my hands. You're not a failure. You are strong. You survived 2 months in hell. You endured humiliation but didn't break. And today you found the strength to say no. That isn't weakness, that's strength. But Vanessa, Vanessa never loved you. Never. She loved the idea of a successful husband. And when you didn't meet her expectations, she threw you out like something useless. People like her don't deserve your tears. Will wiped his face with his sleeve. I'm so tired, Mom. I just want to sleep. Go lie down in my room. I'll make the bed for you. I tucked him in, covered him with a blanket just like when he was a child. He closed his eyes and fell asleep almost instantly. Clearly, he hadn't slept properly in 2 months. I went to the kitchen, sat at the table and called Daniel. Will quit his job. Vanessa kicked him out. He's with me now. I understand, Daniel said. Mrs. Sullivan, I have news. Richard Sterling agreed to the deal. The final negotiations are tomorrow. The meeting where he signs the documents. I want to be there. What? I want to be at that meeting. I want to see his face when he learns the truth. Daniel hesitated. That's risky. He could cause a scene. Let him. I'm not afraid. I want him to see me. To know exactly who destroyed him. All right. The meeting is tomorrow at 2 p.m. at the notary's office. Be there. I hung up. Tomorrow Richard Sterling would learn that his life was over. And I would be there. Looking him in the eyes. For my son. The next day at 2 p.m., I stood at the entrance to the notary's office. Daniel met me at the door. Mrs. Sullivan, are you sure? It's not too late to step aside. I can handle the meeting without you. No, I shook my head. I need to be there. I need to see his face. All right, let's go. Richard is already inside with his attorneys. We entered a spacious office. At the big table sat the notary, a woman in her 50s wearing a strict suit. To her right sat Richard Sterling and 2 men in suits, his lawyers. Richard looked tired, older. Clearly, the past months of crisis had taken a toll on him. When I walked in, he looked up and frowned. And who is this? He asked Daniel. I arranged a meeting with representatives of Summit Capital. Please sit down, Mr. Sterling. Daniel gestured to a chair. Everything will be explained. Richard muttered something under his breath but sat. His attorneys exchanged glances. The notary spread the documents on the table. So, gentlemen, we are here to finalize the sale of the controlling stake in Sterling Industries, she began. The seller, Mr. Richard Sterling. The buyer, Summit Capital. All documents have been verified, terms have been agreed upon. Only the signatures remain. Richard picked up the pen. Let's hurry. I have other meetings today. One moment, Daniel raised his hand. Mr. Sterling, according to the contract, the buyer has the right to reveal their identity at the time of signing. I'd like to exercise that right. Richard looked up from the documents. What identity? You represent Summit Capital. Summit Capital is a legal entity. But behind it is a real person. The person who invested the money, gathered the investors, and organized this entire operation. Richard set the pen down. And who is this mysterious benefactor? Daniel turned toward me. Margaret Sullivan. Silence. Richard stared at me without blinking. His face slowly changed color from normal to red. What? He finally forced out. What did you say? The new owner of the controlling stake in your company is Margaret Sullivan, Daniel repeated calmly. The mother of your former employee, William Sullivan. Richard jumped to his feet. This is a joke. This cleaning woman cannot buy my company. She doesn't have that kind of money. She does. Daniel opened the folder and pulled out bank statements. $5 million. All legal, all verified. Bank guarantees, payment confirmations. Your attorneys may check everything. One of Richard's lawyers took the documents and began reviewing them. A minute later he nodded. Mr. Sterling, everything is correct. The funds are real. The deal is clean. No. Richard slammed his fist on the table. I won't sign. I won't allow this woman to buy my company. Mr. Sterling, the notary interjected, you have already agreed to the terms. If you refuse now, you will owe a penalty of $500,000. And the banks will seize your assets within a week. You have no other option. Richard grabbed his hair in despair. This is impossible. How did she? Where did she get that money? I stood up, took a step closer to the table, looked him straight in the eyes. I worked my whole life, Mr. Sterling. Saved every penny. Sold my apartment. Invested everything I had. Found investors. Took out a loan. All so I could take from you the one thing you were so proud of. For what? He screamed. What did I ever do to you? You humiliated my son. Forced him to his knees. Made him scrub toilets, carry heavy crates, endure mockery. In front of other people. In front of your daughter. You broke him for 2 months, turning him into a servant. He agreed to work for me. Because your daughter pressured him. Told him he was a failure if he didn't work at your company. Richard paced the room, frantic. I'll sue. This is fraud. Illegal takeover. Go ahead, Daniel replied calmly. But you will lose. Everything was done legally. We broke no laws. You were offered to sell your company and you accepted. One of Richard's attorneys leaned over and whispered something into his ear. Richard listened and his face turned even grayer. Mr. Sterling, the attorney said quietly, but I heard every word. We've checked everything. The deal is clean. If you refuse, the banks will seize everything tomorrow. You'll be left with nothing. At least this way you pay the debt. Richard collapsed back into his chair. His hands were trembling. You ruined my life, he whispered, staring at me. No, I shook my head. You ruined your own life the moment you decided you had the right to humiliate other people. I simply ensured justice was served. He picked up the pen. His hand shook so hard he could barely hold it. But he signed. Every document. One after another. The notary reviewed the signatures and applied the official seals. The transaction is complete. As of this moment, Margaret Sullivan is the owner of the controlling stake in Sterling Industries. I looked at Richard. The arrogant man who had laughed at my son now sat broken and hollow before me. Mr. Sterling, I said quietly, you're fired. From all positions. Effective immediately. He lifted his eyes to me. What? You are no longer the director. No longer the owner. Nothing. You may collect your personal belongings from your office by the end of the day. Security will escort you. You can't. I can. I'm the owner now. And my first decision is to remove you. Daniel handed me another document. Mrs. Sullivan, here is the termination order. Sign here. I signed. Richard glared at me with hatred, but he had no power left. You know, Mr. Sterling, I leaned closer. If you'd like, I could offer you a job at the company. There is one position open. What position? He hissed through clenched teeth. Janitor. Restrooms. Salary $15 an hour. How does that sound? His face twisted with rage. He jumped up, grabbed a folder from the table and hurled it at the wall. Go to hell. All of you, he shouted and stormed out of the office. His attorneys hurried after him. The door slammed shut. The three of us remained, the notary, Daniel, and me. Congratulations, Mrs. Sullivan, Daniel said. You are now the owner of a major company. I sank into a chair. My hands were trembling. I had done it. Truly done it. That evening I came home. Will was sitting in the kitchen drinking tea. He looked better, rested, cleaned up. Mom, where were you? He asked. I was worried. I sat across from him and took his hands in mine. Will, I need to tell you something. And I told him. Everything. How I had seen him in that restroom. How I went to Daniel. The entire operation to buy the company. The meeting today. The fact that Sterling Industries now belonged to me. Will listened silently. His face expressionless. When I finished, he stared out the window for a long time. Mom, why? He finally asked quietly. Why did you do this? For you. So that man would pay for what he did to you. You sold your apartment. Put in all your savings. Took out a loan. Mom, you risked everything. I couldn't watch them break you. You're my son. The only person I've lived for all these years. Will stood and walked to the window. And now what? You own a company on the verge of bankruptcy. Debts, problems, loans. How will you handle all that? I smiled. Not me. We. He turned. What? Well, I'm appointing you the CEO of Sterling Industries. Starting tomorrow, you'll run the company. Mom, that's crazy. I can't do this. I don't have experience running a business like that. But you have education, intelligence, integrity. You understand logistics, you know how to work with documents. And Mr. Reynolds will be your advisor. Together, you'll manage. But, sweetheart, I walked up to him, this is your chance. Your chance to prove to yourself and everyone else that you're not a failure. That you're capable of more. Richard Sterling tried to break you, but you didn't break. Now show him that you're stronger. Will looked at me for a long time. Then slowly nodded. All right, Mom. I'll try. The next day we arrived at the Sterling Industries office. Employees greeted us with surprised looks. The news about the change in ownership had already spread. I gathered everyone in the conference room. About 100 people. Managers, accountants, logistics staff, factory workers. Hello, I began. My name is Margaret Sullivan. As of today, I am the owner of this company. I know many of you haven't been paid. I know the company is in crisis. But I promise you this, we will get out of it. Debts will be paid. Salaries restored. And this company will become profitable again. People exchanged glances. Some believed me, others didn't. The new CEO will be William Sullivan, I said, gesturing toward my son. He will run the company. I will remain on the board of directors and oversee strategy. After the meeting, we'll sat down in what used to be Richard's office, now his office. Daniel brought him a stack of documents. Well, here's the list of debts. Here's the payment schedule. Here are the partner contracts that must be renegotiated. Let's get to work. The next months were insane. We worked 14 hours a day. Met with creditors, negotiated extensions. Searched for new partners. Optimized production, cut unnecessary expenses. His first action was to pay all overdue salaries. Employees were shocked. Under Richard, they went months without pay and the new CEO found money within a week. Will personally visited partners, apologized for delays under the previous leadership, offered new terms. Many agreed to give the company another chance. 3 months later we broke even. 6 months after that we made a profit. And within a year Sterling Industries, which we renamed Sullivan Holdings, was fully restored. Employees respected Will. He didn't yell, didn't humiliate, didn't put anyone on their knees. He treated people like people. Remembered their names. Asked about their lives. Because he had lived through humiliation himself. And he knew how much it hurt. A month after Will became CEO, Vanessa called him. He told me about the conversation that evening. She was crying, Mom. She said she'd been wrong. That she loved me. That she wanted to come back. And what did you say? I told her it was too late. That I was filing for divorce. That I didn't want to see her again. I hugged him. You did the right thing, sweetheart. Vanessa truly tried to come back. She showed up at the office, waited for Will outside the building, sent messages. But he was firm. He filed for divorce and 2 months later the marriage was dissolved. The Sterling family fell apart. Richard, stripped of his business and his money, moved into a small rented apartment on the outskirts of the city. He tried to find work, but no one wanted to hire a former owner of a bankrupt company. He lived on government assistance, barely scraping by. Catherine, Richard's wife, couldn't handle the collapse and moved to another city to live with her sister. She filed for divorce. Richard was left completely alone. Vanessa remarried, an older businessman with money. But she wasn't happy. I once saw her at a shopping mall. She looked tired, miserable, even though she was wearing expensive clothes. Will blossomed. A year after the divorce, he met a woman named Sarah. She worked as an architect. Simple, sincere, kind. They dated for 6 months and then Will came to me and said, Mom, I want to marry her. But only if you approve. I met Sarah. And immediately understood. This was the woman my son needed. She looked at him with love. Real love, without calculation, without greed. The wedding was small, surrounded by close friends. Will was happy. Truly happy. 2 years later they had a son. My grandson. They named him James. The first time I held him I cried from happiness. The circle had come full circle. I, the woman who was once left alone with a newborn, now held my grandchild with my successful, happy son standing beside me. Will became a respected businessman. Sullivan Holdings flourished. He built an honest company where every employee was valued, where people were paid fairly and treated with dignity. I retired but remained on the board of directors. Sometimes I visited the office, watched my son work, and felt proud. I saw Richard a few times. Once in a grocery store. He was standing by a shelf of cheap food counting coins. Aged, hunched, wearing a worn-out jacket. He didn't see me. And I simply walked past. I didn't feel spite. I didn't feel satisfaction at his downfall. I simply understood. Life had put everything in its place. A man who built his happiness on humiliating others received exactly what he deserved. I'm 65 now. I'm a grandmother. I have a son, a daughter-in-law, a grandson. I have a small but cozy apartment. I have a peaceful life. Sometimes I remember the day I saw Will on his knees in that restroom. And I realize, everything I did afterward was right. Not for revenge. Not for money. But so my son wouldn't lose himself. So he would remember that he is human. That he has dignity. This story is about how far a mother's love can go. About how no one has the right to break another person. About how justice can win, if you're willing to fight for it. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. Tell us in the comments which moment touched you the most. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss new stories. Like this video if you believe in the power of a mother's love and justice. And before you go, check out the story we left here on the screen. I'm sure it will move you and make you think.